You've probably seen someone get genuinely upset about something small, not hurt, not inconvenienced, upset in a way that seems disproportionate. Maybe someone used the wrong pronoun in a sentence. Maybe someone didn't recycle a bottle. Maybe someone made a joke about the wrong topic. Maybe someone ate meat at a vegan gathering. The reaction wasn't just disagreement, it was moral outrage, as if a boundary had been crossed, as if something sacred had been violated. And here's the interesting part. The person reacting might describe themselves as completely secular, not religious at all, rational, evidence-based, post-religious. And yet, the response looks remarkably similar to religious offense. Not identical, but structurally similar. Same intensity, same certainty, same sense that something untouchable has been touched. Why do people who've left religion still behave religiously? Before we keep going, if this kind of quiet thinking is your thing, you might want to subscribe to Belief Explained Simply. These videos move slowly, sit with questions, and don't rush to conclusions. And if you know someone who enjoys conversations like this, feel free to share it with them. All right, let's keep going. There's a pattern worth noticing. In societies where traditional religious participation has dropped sharply, Western Europe, parts of North America, urban coastal areas, people didn't stop having sacred values, they just stopped calling them sacred. The language changed. The content stayed remarkably similar. Consider how people talk about certain topics now. Climate change isn't just an environmental issue. For many, it's a moral imperative, a test of character, a way to identify who's good and who's selfish. Social justice isn't just policy preference, it's righteous cause. It has saints and sinners, confession and atonement, orthodoxy and heresy. Wellness culture, yoga, meditation, clean eating, mindfulness isn't just health optimization, it's spiritual practice. It has rituals, gurus, transformation narratives, and promised enlightenment. These aren't criticisms. They're observations. Because what's interesting isn't that these things exist, it's that they function the same way religion used to function. They provide moral clarity, a sense of what's right and wrong beyond personal preference, community identity, a way to know who we are, meaning, a framework that says your choices matter beyond your immediate self-interest, ritual, repeated behaviors that reinforce values and create belonging, transcendence, the feeling that you're part of something larger than yourself. These are the same functions temples provided, the same functions churches provided. The architecture changed, the language changed, but the structure remained. Let's sit with that for a moment. Because the common narrative is, modern secular people are less dogmatic, more open-minded, less tribal. They've moved beyond belief into rationality, but have they? Or have they just transferred the same psychological mechanisms onto different content? Consider orthodoxy. In religious contexts, orthodoxy means there's a correct interpretation of doctrine, and deviation is dangerous. In secular progressive spaces, there's often a correct position on social issues, and deviation gets you labeled, excluded, sometimes professionally destroyed. The mechanism is identical. The content is different. Consider heresy. In religious contexts, heresy means certain questions are impermissible. Certain doubts are dangerous. In contemporary discourse, both left and right, certain questions are off limits. Certain topics can't be questioned without moral condemnation. Why would anyone need that becomes, why would anyone question this? Same structure, different subjects. Consider ritual purity. Religious traditions have dietary laws, cleanliness rituals, behavioral codes that separate the pure from the impure. Modern secular culture has organic versus processed, ethical consumption versus exploitation, correct language versus harmful language. These aren't just preferences. They're moral boundaries. You can tell because violating them doesn't just produce disagreement, it produces disgust. Disgust is the emotion of contamination, of something pure being corrupted. That's not reason. That's the same psychological mechanism religions use to maintain boundaries. Here's where it gets stranger. Many secular people are aware of this. They can see it in others. They can see how political movements function like religions, how consumer brands create cult-like devotion, how social media mobs perform public shamings that look identical to historical religious persecutions. They can see it, but they can't see it in themselves. Because when it's your sacred value, it doesn't feel like religion. It feels like truth. It feels like moral clarity. It feels like the thing that's obviously right. And anyone who disagrees is either ignorant or malicious. That's exactly how religious people feel about their doctrines. Not all religious people. Not always, but often enough that the parallel is unmistakable. And here's the uncomfortable question. If the feeling is identical, what's the actual difference? Is it the content? Is it that secular sacred values are objectively correct while religious ones aren't? Maybe. But if you can't tell the difference from the inside, if the psychological experience is the same, then the distinction might matter less than we think. Let's look at confession and atonement. Religious traditions have structured ways to acknowledge wrongdoing and make amends. Catholicism has confession, Judaism has Yom Kippur, Buddhism has practices of acknowledging harm and generating compassion. These are ritualized, predictable. They have beginnings and endings. Modern secular culture has public apologies on social media. Someone says something wrong, or something that's interpreted as wrong. There's outrage, demands for apology. The person issues a statement. Sometimes it's accepted, often it's not. There's no clear path to redemption, no ritual that says you've atoned, you're forgiven, you're restored, just permanent record. Digital scarlet letters. Social exile. The religious version was often harsh, sometimes brutal, but it had a structure. It had a process. It acknowledged that people make mistakes and can be restored. The secular version has the judgment without the mercy, the punishment without the pathway back, which suggests that maybe secular societies didn't abandon religious mechanisms because they were bad. They abandoned the framework but kept the impulse. And without the framework, the impulse becomes more punitive. Not less. Consider martyrdom. Religious traditions honor people who sacrifice themselves for their beliefs. Saints, martyrs, bodhisattvas. These figures model ultimate commitment. They say, this value is worth dying for. Modern secular culture has activists who go on hunger strikes, who chain themselves to trees, who put their bodies on the line for causes. Environmental activists, social justice organizers, political dissidents. The mechanism is identical. Physical sacrifice as moral testimony. The cause is different. The psychology is the same. We even use similar language, speaking truth to power, bearing witness, staying true to your values. That's religious language. We just don't notice because it's been secularized. Here's another pattern. Sacred texts. Religious traditions have scriptures, books that are treated as authoritative, that can't be questioned without consequence. Secular movements have their own canon, Marx and Engels for some, Foucault and Butler for others, Friedman and Hayek for yet others. These texts are cited the way Scripture is cited, as settled authority, as unquestionable foundation. You can interpret them, you can apply them, you can debate what they really meant, but you can't dismiss them without being dismissed yourself. That's not science. Science is falsifiable. You're supposed to question it. This is something else. This is treated as sacred, and the people treating it this way would be offended by that description, because they see themselves as rational, evidence-based, post-religious, but the behavior says otherwise. Let's talk about conversion experiences. Religious people have them. A moment of revelation, a before and after. I was lost, now I'm found. Secular people have them too. I used to eat meat, but then I watched this documentary and everything changed. I used to be conservative, but then I went to college and my eyes were opened. I used to be liberal, but then I had kids and I realized, same structure. Darkness to light, ignorance to knowledge, wrong to right. Same narrative of transformation, same sense that you've seen something others haven't seen yet. Same missionary impulse. You need to help others see what you've seen. That's evangelism. We just call it raising awareness. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. If secular people are behaving religiously, just with different content, what does that say about religion? Maybe religion wasn't a mistake that modernity corrected. Maybe religion was a name for something humans do. Something we can't not do. Something about how we construct meaning, how we form groups, how we navigate moral complexity. And when we remove the traditional religious framework, we don't eliminate the behavior. We just do it without structure, without tradition, without the accumulated wisdom of how to do it well. We reinvent it from scratch. And we make all the same mistakes, the same tribalism, the same certainty, the same inability to tolerate disagreement, the same need for purity, the same impulse to punish heresy, but without the vocabulary to recognize what we're doing, because we've convinced ourselves we're past all that. Consider pilgrimage. Religious people travel to sacred sites: Mecca, Jerusalem, Varanasi, Santiago de Compostela. These journeys aren't vacations, they're transformative. They mark transitions. They require sacrifice, time, money, physical hardship. Secular people do this too. They travel to Burning Man, to Machu Picchu, to festivals, to protests. Not for fun, for meaning. They come back changed. They talk about it the way religious people talk about pilgrimage. It transformed me. I found myself. I connected with something larger. Same structure, same function, different label. Here's a thought that might make both religious and secular people uncomfortable. What if the difference between religious and secular isn't belief in God? What if it's just whether you acknowledge what you're doing? Religious people say, yes, I have sacred values. Yes, I participate in rituals. Yes, I belong to a moral community. Yes, I believe some things are true beyond personal preference. Secular people do all those things. They just don't call them sacred. Ritual, moral community, or truth. They call them values, habits, networks, and facts. But functionally, they're serving the same psychological and social needs. The religious person at least knows they're being religious. The secular person thinks they're being rational while performing the exact same behaviors, which means they can't examine those behaviors critically, because to examine them would require admitting they exist, and admitting they exist would require admitting you're being religious. And you can't be religious because you're secular. It's a closed loop. Let's look at sacred spaces. Religious people have them. Churches, mosques, temples, synagogues, places where different rules apply, where you behave differently, where certain things can't be said or done. Secular societies have them too. University campuses, art galleries, memorial sites, nature preserves. These aren't just buildings or locations. They're spaces with sacred status. You don't behave the same way you behave outside them. You speak more quietly, you show respect, you follow unwritten codes. And violating those codes produces the same reaction as violating religious sacred space. Outrage, when someone disrupts a moment of silence at a memorial, when someone vandalizes art, when someone develops land that's supposed to stay wild. The reaction isn't just, that's illegal or that's rude, it's, that's sacrilege. We just don't use that word anymore. Consider apocalyptic thinking. Religious traditions have end times narratives. The world will end, judgment will come, the righteous will be saved, the wicked punished. Secular culture has climate apocalypse, nuclear winter, AI extinction, pandemic collapse. The structure is identical. We're approaching catastrophe. Only radical change can save us. Time is running out. The fear is the same. The urgency is the same. The moral weight is the same. Some of these threats are real. Climate change is real. But the way people talk about them isn't just scientific, it's apocalyptic. It has the same psychological function as religious apocalypse. It creates urgency, it separates the righteous from the damned, it promises transformation through crisis. That's not critique, it's observation. Because if the mechanisms are the same, maybe the mechanisms are revealing something true about humans. Maybe we need apocalyptic thinking. Maybe we need the fear of ultimate consequences to motivate action. Maybe that's not a bug. Maybe it's a feature. Here's the pattern. Everywhere traditional religion has retreated, the same structures have reappeared in secular form. Sacred values, just called core values or non-negotiables. Orthodoxy, just called the science or settled facts. Heresy, just called misinformation or harmful speech. Ritual, just called practice or routine. Confession, just called accountability. Excommunication, just called cancellation. Pilgrimage, just called transformative travel. Sacred texts, just called foundational works. Clergy, just called experts or thought leaders. Conversion, just called awakening. The words changed, the functions didn't. So here's the question that won't resolve. Are secular societies actually secular, or are they just religious in ways they don't recognize? Not pretending to be secular, genuinely believing they're secular. While performing all the same behaviors religion performs, just without the framework that says, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, these are the dangers, here's how to do it well. Without that framework, secular societies reinvent religious behaviors, but worse, harsher, more absolute, less forgiving. Because they don't see themselves as religious, they can't see when they're being dogmatic. They can't apply the critiques of religion to themselves, because those critiques don't apply. Because they're not religious, even while excommunicating heretics. Maybe the lesson isn't that religion was wrong. Maybe the lesson is that humans are religious creatures. Not in the sense that we all believe in God, but in the sense that we all construct sacred meaning. We all need moral community. We all perform rituals. We all have orthodoxies. And pretending we don't makes us worse at it, not better. Because we can't learn from thousands of years of religious wisdom about how to do these things. We just stumble forward, recreating the same patterns, making the same mistakes, calling it progress. You've probably felt that moral outrage again over something small, something that seemed to violate a boundary. And maybe you caught yourself thinking, this isn't religion, this is different. This is true, and maybe it is. But maybe it's worth noticing that every religious person in history has felt exactly the same way about their truth. If this raised something for you, an agreement, a disagreement, or even just a question, you're welcome to share it in the comments. Not answers, just what this brought up for you. I read them.